Okay, I am going to call to order the Sacramento Area Council of Governments Land Use and Natural Resources Committee meeting for Thursday, February 5th. This meeting is being held in person. You can watch it online if you prefer. If you would like to make public comment in the room, submit one of these blue comment cards, which are available in the back there, and bring them to our clerk. And all right, guess I'll read the whole thing. No public comment will be taken through live stream or by telephone comments. Comments will be taken on an item at the times taken up by the board. Members of the public can participate in the meeting via written or verbal comments as described below. In person, public comment may be made in person at SACOG's offices or at the alternative meeting location designated on the agenda, if any. You will have 3 minutes to speak unless a different time is set by the chair. Please complete a speaker form and provide it to the clerk. If attending at the alternative meeting location, please inform a SACOG official in attendance that you request to speak. Agenda during time durations are estimates only on the agenda. Any writings or documents provided to the majority of the board regarding any item on this agenda other than writings legally exempt from public disclosure are available on SACOG's website. SACOG provides access to all agenda and meeting materials online at sacog.org, meetings/meetings agendas. Additionally, interested persons can sign up for email notifications. SACOG provides a modification or accommodation, auxiliary aids or services, including receiving the agenda and attachments in an alternative format accommodation in order to participate in this meeting. In compliance with California Government Code Section 54952.3, the clerk hereby announces that the compensation, blah, blah, blah. Will everybody please stand and join me for the National Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Yes, just confirm your presence. Director Baines.
Present.
Bradford.
Here.
Houlihan.
Here.
Clark Kretz. Here. Maple.
Here.
Villegas. Absent. Vice Chair Hume. Absent. Vice Chair Teeter.
Present.
And Chair Kozlowski.
Here. Okay, we're now moving to public communication. It's time for anybody who wishes to address the board on an item that does not appear elsewhere on this agenda. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment?
Yes, we have public comment.
All
From
right,
David Schwegel.
David Schwegel, come on up.
Good afternoon, Lunar Committee. My name is David Schwegel of Vang Incorporated Consulting Engineers. I get to work out of their Loomis office, preparing transportation impact studies and doing a lot of evaluations for transit-oriented development. And I love TOD. When I think of the Lunar Committee, the first thing that comes to mind is TOD. And I think of getting up bright and early in the morning and having to split logs. It's like 7 in the morning because we live in Granite Bay, far, far away from any sort of TOD. And I would much rather get up at like 10 o'clock, go out in the TOD and go to those quaint shops and interact with my friends and family. So when I was out there splitting logs, I sang the song, "Life in the TOD, ain't nowhere I'd rather be." And my mom said, "David, don't you ever sing that song to me again?" I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, you take me on a trip to the Salesforce Transit Center and I will not sing that song to you ever again." Now, speaking of TOD, the United States High-Speed Rail Association has a Transit-Oriented Development Institute, and you might want to check out their conference May 12th to the 14th in Washington, D.C., which features 2 days of educational sessions plus 1 day on Capitol Hill, where you can advocate for high-speed rail and station area development. Because as Stuart Cohen of Transform says, TOD is the most exciting aspect of high-speed rail. And we are finally making strides here in Sacramento on TOD. I am pleased to see that 15 years after the New York Times declared the rail yards as the nation's largest urban infill project, that we're finally seeing construction there. And I always make it a point when I come to downtown Sacramento to head over to Sacramento Valley Station and then walk around the rail yards. And I'm very impressed with the progress on Kaiser Hospital. Looking forward to seeing the Sacramento Republic, MLSS, come to fruition, as well as the High Speed Rail Museum. I've been talking to the Sacramento, California State Railroad Museum on that development. And of course, looking at all the TOD elements in addition to what's going on. So that's really going to put Sacramento on the map. Now, we have a lot of unused parking on light rail. Go to the Roseville Road Station and you'll see a multitude of unused parking. And I was wondering to myself, why is it that ACE, Ultimate Corridor Express, is only being required by the city of Sacramento to build a few protected bike lanes and call it good in connection with the station? And apparently that's because of all the parking we have available. But I'd like to, in closing, give a charge to this committee. The Roseville Road Station parking, put in a big parking structure, and then with the remainder, put in a number of TOD elements. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. Okay, next up, we're going to take under consideration the consent calendar. Madam Clerk, is there anyone from the public who wishes to remove an item for public comment?
There's no public comment.
Would like to make a motion or bring
Brad-
something up for discussion?
Bradford will move to approve. Second by Baines.
Have a motion by Bradford, second by Baines. Can we do a voice vote or do we need to? All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, motion passes. All right, next we have our action item, number 2, adoption of the 2026 Land Use and Natural Resources Committee charge. Flint Holtzen, SACOG staff will present the item.
This will just be a brief thank you. Look ahead at what is coming to you in 2026. Your charge largely remains the same, but the work that's coming to the committee will see some changes from what you experienced last year. We just adopted our 2025 blueprint at the end of last year, so we're not going to be seeing another major update of that until 2031. But this committee will see a small minor technical update of that starting this year that we have to finish by the end of 2027. That's part of the legislation that we got to extend the bill. We do have to do a minor update to give us all that time to implement before we have to do a full update in 2031. So you'll oversee that. You'll also be overseeing the kickoff to the Cycle 7 RENA process. So that is a major element that will be coming to you. Housing will be a big focus of the committee this year. You'll be overseeing our Green Means Go program, $60 million in grants out now. You'll hear from Dob later today just about looking for additional funding opportunities to provide some permanent supportive or funding for that program. So I won't get too much into the Green Means Go today, but that'll be a major topic throughout the year. And then we kind of a shift in this committee. The committee already has a charge over our air quality conformity and natural resources role under the federal government for the Clean Air Act. All of the work that we do on that, kind of the programming of federal and state dollars to transportation projects, that will come into this committee. Typically, that's been at the Transportation Committee. You kind of had a shared charge over that. All of that is moving over. So you'll hear from Miguel later today on a couple of programming topics that we're asking for some input or some action on today. A lot of the work that you'll be seeing is kind of the work that we do after your agency receives either a regional grant from SACOG that comes out of the Transportation Committee, or you get a federal or a state grant. SACOG kind of has wraparound services to make sure that you're staying in compliance, that you're getting reimbursed, that you're hitting all your deadlines. And so this committee will kind of oversee that process and how we make sure funding stays in the region and is used very efficiently. So that's kind of the big change that you'll see. All of these things, you'll kind of get a little preview today from your next presenters on what you'll be seeing throughout the year. And then, of course, the big focus on blueprint implementation. We've got 5 years before the next major update. And so we'll be bringing lots of content on how SACOG can lean in on helping your members implement your local priorities, particularly where they're overlapping with the regional plan. So that's kind of what you'll see for the year. And we're looking for a recommendation from the committee to adopt your charge for 2026 today.
Fantastic. Thank you. Directors, any questions?
Just a quick question for, through the chair, sorry, quick question for clarification. The thing that was added to our charge this time related to the transportation funding kind of post award, is that predominantly, not that I have any concerns about this committee having purview over that, but was just curious if that was kind of a workload balance, kind of that transportation has a lot of other things they're working on, and that was maybe why that decision was made.
I think it's a little bit of that. There just isn't a lot of time for the Transportation Committee to really wrestle with these issues, and there's a lot of support that we provide. On top of that, most of kind of the responsibility of the MTIP, our near-term four-year program, it's about meeting our compliance with the Federal Clean Air Act. Air quality conformity is within this committee's charge. So you already kind of had the foothold over this subject area. And then, yeah, it made sense to shift it over so we could spend more time talking about those issues here.
Okay, thank you.
Any others? Questions? All right, any public comment?
There's no public comment.
I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
All right, we have a motion by Baines and a second by Clark Kretz. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. All right. Item number 3 on our agenda is the SACOG project delivery process. Miguel Mendoza from SACOG staff is going to present this item. Welcome, Miguel.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm used to morning committee meetings, so this is good. Miguel Mendoza, Planning and Programming Team. I'm here for your consideration, our 2026 delivery process. And before really diving into the process, which you have as attachment A to this item, a really brief description of programming and delivery, and we'll take it in halves as the name suggests. Clint sort of introduced some of it already, but programming is specific to a list of projects, the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, and I'll call it MTIP going forward. And it's again, a listing of projects that covers 4 years. And I often like to say that, and perhaps I took this from Clint, that it's the pointy end of your long-range transportation plan project list. And that to me is pretty apt because one of the major regulations or requirements, federal and state, to the MTIP is that it must be consistent with the long-range plan list. To say that in other words, if you have a project that needs to be included in the MTIP, you must have been identified in the long-range plan. A second requirement, I'm going to highlight just a few requirements out of the myriad that exists, is if a project in the region has federal dollars, it must be in the MTIP. Again, it's perhaps said in other words, if a project needs to access federal dollars that have been awarded, transportation federal dollars, it needs to be in the MTIP. So in practicality, what that looks like, right, is if you have a project with federal dollars, you submit your paperwork to start work with Caltrans, they will often refer to the MTIP, and if it's not accurate, it either needs to be corrected before continuing on, or more discussions need to happen. And then the third and fourth are sort of similarly on the same vein. The MTIP must be fiscally constrained. All expected revenues and expenses need to match over the 4 years. And then the last is all dollars need to be secured to be in the MTIP. So this is a big difference from planning for a decades-long horizon versus the next 4 years. It's dollars that need to be there either through a federal award or your local agencies have secured it through CIP or something of that sort. And as Clint had mentioned, this work often happens after awards, and I'll take the SACOG Regional Funding Program as a really good example. After the board or after SACOG board awards these projects funds, they'll come to programming and delivery. We'll consult with your staff and agencies. We'll look at the application and we'll put the awards in the specific years that they need to be. And so the movement in time of dollars and how quickly projects get delivered is an air quality concern as much as it is anything else. Just as a side note, I've talked to other regions outside of California who don't have to worry about air quality concerns as much, and they just put it in wherever, right? Like they don't have to have this extra level, which we do. In terms of project delivery then, again, as Clint mentioned, we have a lot of wraparound services. Even if it's not funding that SACOG is awarding, we try to help if we can on getting projects started, and started meaning getting approval to start federally reimbursable work, right? You have to have this specific piece of paper to start work. Before you get that and you started work, you're not going to get reimbursed. So we want to make sure we get to that point so that projects can advance. And there's two goals, really big goals for delivery. The first, that, like I said, assisting folks in getting that approval. The second is when we receive funds in the region, federal funding, specifically congestion mitigation and air quality, and which is CMAQ, and Regional Surface Transportation Program funds. If these sound familiar, these are the funds used in the regional funding program. They're provided yearly and they have an expiration date. So our second big goal is let's use all the money as quickly as we can to make sure that we don't lose it. And so that's really what concerns in terms of the project delivery process. It's that second one that we're really trying to hone in on. This process, again, attachment A to this item, splits the SACOG awards into 3 tiers. The first are the immediate projects that can deliver. Again, we've consulted with your agencies, we've looked at the applications, they're in the specific years. They have priorities for like 4 months. You can come in, get approvals, we'll help you with whatever you need. You're programmed in the MTIP, you're good to go. After that, right, come February 1st, tier 2 comes in, which is any other projects within the 4 years. So what typically would happen is if you, let's say right now is 26, you may have a project in 27 and you say, hey, we're ready now. It's early, but we're ready. Once after February 1st comes, you can contact SACOG, and what we do is we check that regional balance and we say, hey, there's some funding that hasn't been used. Come in and use it. You're good to go. And so those are the first 2 tiers, and the third being this one is not as utilized, but it's important when it is utilized, which are project loans, right? If you've been awarded a SACOG award, the bids have come in. It's a little bit over what you thought it would be. Very common, right? And an agency knows that they may have local dollars in the next year. There's a couple of options. You can wait until you have the dollars next year to deliver the project. You might face, cost escalations, inflation, whatever it may be. Or another option is you come to SACOG, ask for that difference. We loan out in federal dollars, whatever that difference is. And then SACOG would work with the agency to make sure we get payback and whatever the dollars are that we're expected to cover the gap. So those are the three tiers, and really that's the core of this process. But before sort of wrapping up on what we're seeking approval for, there's that last part, it's on the second page of that attachment, is what happens if a project comes in a little later in the year and we've used up all of our money, which is our goal anyway. There's a couple of options, and I guess from least that I like to use to the most that I'd like to use is one, we ask a project to stop and wait. I don't like that, right? We want to, if a project is ready, let's go. Second, we can ask a local agency to use local money first until the federal dollars are available. Again, still a little bit less palatable than the last option here. The third is a mix. Maybe we just have partial amount of money to provide. But the last one, and one that we've utilized for many years, is we can actually go to other regions within the state and borrow their unused federal dollars, and we pay back no interest, either the year after, the year after. It doesn't really go longer than the 4 years of the MTIP. And what that does is it gives us capacity now. And then what essentially we end up doing is the payback is ideally whatever the years that project came from. So it's a even swap. There's really no difference in the yearly apportionments that we get. But with that, yeah, hopefully that was clear enough. Happy to take any questions, and again, asking for approval on the process itself.
Okay, 2 questions. If you're borrowing from another region, is the presumption that they're not going to be able to use that year's funds?
Correct.
And they're going to give them back or go wanting in some way?
So yes, so the presumption, or when we call them, they know they can't use it, perhaps. Sometimes it's a smaller agency, they only have a few projects.
Yeah.
And then the payback would be advantageous to them, because these funds have an expiration date. By us using it first.
Okay, it's
and we
use
pay back.
it or lose it. So
Correct.
it's in their interest to
Correct.
loan it out if they
Yeah.
can't use it in that moment. Okay. And then if you're arranging a loan of either future funds or someone else's funds from a future year or other projects, what parameters have you established for when you pull that trigger, and what for lack of a more artful term, what the VIG is on that?
Yeah. Just to clarify, is it the tier 3 loans or the
Yes, the tier 3
interregional?
loans.
Oh, yeah. So the tier 3 loans, there's a couple of things that we make sure are there. One, it needs to have been a project that's already been awarded through the regional funding round.
Got it.
Can't just be a project that we haven't seen
Understood.
before. And then 2, the amount really matters, right? We can't do such large loans that would impact future years. And we haven't really seen anything large enough to like, hey, we need to pause. Usually these are really incremental costs. I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but like with these loans, we typically don't see more than 10 to 15% of the total award that we've given. And the reason for that is agencies already bake in a 15% contingency, typically is industry standard.
Right.
So when they get a really high bid, it's not going to be much more than that. And again, a lot of this is an agreement. Nothing is, we have boilerplates, but nothing is the same each time. So we work with them.
Okay, I'm gonna ask a slightly different way. Have you established an upper limit on something like that on a percentage basis or on a dollar basis? Because eventually things like that come into a situation where they can be oversubscribed,
Mhm.
and who gets to decide?
Yeah, I think
Is that
that's
ultimately coming back to our board? the
Correct.
Transportation
Correct.
Committee, Lunar, some group of staff? What happens in order to say that that is a sensible loan to make?
yeah, correct. No upper limit, but it will come back to committee for
Okay.
decision, right? Because it's going to affect future
Back to
years.
Lunar,
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, going forward, yes.
the full board?
Yeah,
Lunar first,
Lunar
then
and
the
then
full board?
Lunar first, then
Yeah.
the full board. And I think part of the reason that we want to start bringing these to Lunar is
Yeah.
we can have conversations about where the board wants to start bringing more policy into these tools so
Gotcha.
that we can use them. This is a tool that is not used super often. It's usually used, right, if a project is money a little bit further out and they want to advance it, they're just swapping years. But if we wanted to use this as more of a blueprint implementation tool and lean into it, we're going to increase demand for it. And that's where I think this committee has the ability to have a policy discussion about how we do that.
Yeah, the fact that I asked 5 questions and didn't let it just breeze by will make somebody think, hey, we should make use of that. But, okay. Board members, any other questions? No? Okay,
Chair
fantastic.
Kozlowski.
Vice Chair Teeter.
So do the third tier priority would be repaying those loans then? That would be the top of the next year would be back those loans. Okay.
Yes.
Chair
Anything else?
Kozlowski, I'm just going to offer, when I was just back with the National Association of our regional councils, all the councils of governments in DC and up on the Hill, which will be a lot this spring and this year. In particular, there are 2 things that Hill staff are really interested in. The first is performance measures and data. How have all these investments actually changed things on the ground? Because we've actually had a set of federal performance measures now for 14 years. That have sort of evolved over time. And the second is, what are you all doing as MPOs to basically help facilitate getting the projects built, accelerated, in this case, as you just heard from Miguel, making sure that we don't lose money, right, as a state. Glad that you're asking questions already. That's the intent of bringing this to this committee and giving you a little bit of time to dig into these things. But it is of real interest at the federal level as they begin to rethink and rewrite the federal transportation bill.
Gotcha. Notwithstanding everybody's commitments outside of this room, please don't ever apologize for going into the weeds.
Okay, yeah, perfect. No,
All
good
right,
to hear.
fantastic. Is there any public Director Clark Kretz?
Director Clark, is your microphone on?
So can you please clarify the expiration date and then it gets reestablished when it gets paid back? Or can you go into that a little bit, please?
Yes, yeah. So the expiration date is, there's really 2. When federal dollars are provided to California, there's a 4-year expiration date. So if it's unused within 4 years, it goes back to the federal government. The second level is in California, they take a year of it. So we only actually have 3. The regions do. If we don't use money within 3 years, the state gets to program our dollars to something else. And we usually don't have a say as to where that goes. Our goal is to make sure to use it every year. We don't even want to approach 3. As for the payback, the benefit here is if you're a region that's maybe coming up on year 3, you loan it to SACOG, we use it now. When we pay you back in the future, that money has a clean, fresh expiration date. You have another 3 years. And so these relationships are very beneficial for both. We get to deliver projects, they get to hold on to money a little bit longer.
Thank you.
All right, is there anyone from the public that wants to comment on this?
There's no public comment.
All right, then I'll entertain a motion. Push this forward.
I'll make a
Bradford will,
motion.
Bradford will second.
Okay, we have a motion by Teeter and a second by Bradford. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Abstentions? Okay, motion passes. All right, we're on to action item number 4, which is also going to be presented by Miguel. That is the Sacramento County Fund Swap Request, a specific one.
Yes.
Okay.
Specific one, yes. Yeah, good afternoon again. So this, again, one of the tools that we use for delivery and getting projects started earlier are fund swaps. And in a general sense, a fund swap, very vanilla one, is between two projects that have been awarded by SACOG, right? It's same agency. What we could do is facilitate an exchange for equal dollars of one full federal amount and then the equal amount of local. And the effect is now you have a project with just local money and then another project with more federal money than it had before. The benefit there is, right, you're locally funded in one project. You don't have to go through a lot of the things that you would have to if federal money is tied to a project. You can deliver it faster. The other project, because it already had federal money, its schedule is not impacted. It was still going to do all of these steps and things that it would have to do. So that's a very vanilla type of fund swap and one that we've done before. This specific situation is between projects that are a mix, or projects that have received a SACOG award and projects that have never received an award, which is why we wanted to come here and present this item for your consideration, because it does involve projects that have not gone through the process yet. Specifically, Sacramento County is requesting to, and by the way, attachment A to your item, we have a table of what the funding does here. There's 4 projects involved. The first one is Hazel Avenue US 50 interchange. This is the project with the federal dollars. The intent for this is to move federal dollars off of it. And Hazel Avenue is going to be segmented into two, I don't want to say phases, into 2 delivery schedules. The first is already fully funded. It has state money, local money, and then federal money from SACOG. By moving federal funding off of this segment, they can deliver it with just state and local, and now we've bypassed a lot of the federal requirements that would be associated with it. And then the 3 projects that would be receiving federal and returning in local money. The first being Greenback Complete Streets. All of these projects, by the way, are in Sacramento County and are being delivered by SAC DOT. Greenback Lane Complete Streets. This is set to, if approved, would receive the $1 million of that $2 million of federal money from Hazel and would give back the same amount of money to Hazel Avenue in local dollars. And this is installing Class 2 bike lanes, sidewalks, and ADA upgrades. And specific to Greenback, this exchange implements the blueprint, and we have the policies listed in that attachment, right? Policy Invest 9, making sure it's eligible for competitive funds. And here's the thing that's sort of a common theme with a couple of these projects. There's a benefit to moving federal dollars off, right? You don't have to do a bunch of these things, but sometimes there's a benefit to getting federal dollars. And the main benefit is you can start and complete NEPA, which is the federal environmental phase, with the expectation that perhaps this project will get federal dollars in the future. What happens there is you're more shovel ready. You don't have to go back and complete NEPA. You're able to start it and complete it. And then the third project on this is Stockton Boulevard Complete Streets. This is a neutral benefit. It just received a 2025 STIP award from SACOG. It's identified here because it has the local dollars to absorb this exchange. It already has federal dollars. Schedule is not really affected. And then the last one is Watt Avenue Undercrossing. And this particular project is trying to coordinate its environmental schedule with the Mega Region project, which is CCJPA's Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority's third track project. The main idea here is if the county misses the window to get environmental completed on this project and they are unable to construct these improvements along with the third track, it's going to be another 75 years before they can look at this again. And the issue that they're trying to ameliorate here is the current underpass has no bike lanes or sidewalks for folks. So what folks are doing is either crossing the rail directly, or there's like this, I don't even know what to call it, this like pipe that people are, they're just walking right under or biking under. It looks unsafe. And so it's an issue that they'd like to get handled now versus 75 years from now. But as a general sense, this exchange, this swap, we hope, and I can go through it in more detail. We hope is something that implements the blueprint more, which is why we're proposing it and supporting it. And something that we see benefit to each project, except Stockton, that's a neutral one. And hopefully be able to get projects on the ground sooner, especially Hazel, which could actually deliver a little bit faster without the federal requirements associated with those dollars. Happy to answer any questions on those. We also have county staff, if there's any super specific questions I can answer.
Excellent. Director Maple.
Hey, Chair. One question I have is related to the Stockton Boulevard project, but I guess it can apply to all of these. When there are, segments of these projects, does it take into account other things that are planned or hoped for in the future? So for example, something like Stockton Boulevard VRT is something that we want to see in the future, but, obviously this is only a segment of Stockton Boulevard in the county. Does it plan or hope for those other projects, or is it, we're going to do this portion of it, and if and when we can eventually get BRT, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. No pun intended, cross that road.
Yeah, for this specific project, I don't know if county staff is available to answer that part.
Hello. When the county went for the ATP application for the Stockton Boulevard project, so from Florin Road to Mac Elsie, we knew that the Stockton BRT project was coming up. So we did anticipate that project was going in. And so we have been coordinating with the city, and we're also on the PDT for the BRT project. And as we have been looking for future rounds of funding for the Southerly project, we have been also talking about the entire Stockton Boulevard corridor as like, this is the vision that we want to see. And even though the BRT project isn't part of this project, it's part of the greater vision, and it has a greater regional impact.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Other questions from directors? Okay, I will ask the philosophical question, or the, what would it be? The slippery slope question, I suppose. Does this open the door to people gaming competitive funding rounds by putting a very attractive project on the table, getting it funded, and then swapping that money to other projects that would not have been as competitive? And this is completely independent of the project that's right in front of us, because I think there's great merit to it, and I've talked at some depth with you guys about it. But does it open that door, and how do you, do we even guard against that?
Thank you. There's a weedy answer to that, and perhaps Clint can come in for the more overall picture. But so
you can say no, we're fine.
No, so as part of guarding against that possibility,
Okay.
What we typically do is make sure, as part of these agreements, when a project has federal dollars removed, SACOG federal dollars removed, one, there's a commitment from the agency to deliver that project. Once we remove the dollars, we lose that kind of hold on the project. And to prevent any movements outside of it that would be gaming it, perhaps, I would like to submit this as evidence, right? Anytime we get a fund swap request that's not just between two SACOG awarded projects, the idea is to come to the committee and then to the board, one for your consideration. But also we would do the analysis to say, hey, these implement the blueprint on this, and this level, or it doesn't. And I think that may not be a perfect answer, but it's one I don't know.
Yeah, I guess even within the boundaries of implementing components of the blueprint, you could still, if we were talking about two agencies that were making a swap, right? You could very easily, I could imagine a scenario where a project that would be hard to get funding for, that's more outlying, would, want to swap with a project that's more, city center, that was extraordinarily competitive for those funds to start out with. And you might still be trading for things that legitimately are part of the blueprint, but the timing has changed dramatically, right? So there's probably no perfect answer to that. It's a reasonableness question, I suppose. But
Yeah. I think you
it's
kind of
worth
nailed it.
thinking about, I suppose, more than
Yeah, with
anything
that
else.
reasonableness question. And I think, again, it's one of those areas that we could look to expand some additional policy around. I think the tact that we're taking here is, again, if SACOG board has decided we'll award this project and they're swapping between, it's pretty neutral. When we do the fund agreement on something like this, we would require, you're still delivering this Hazel project to the kind of
Yeah.
specs that you laid out in the application. That's part of the agreement. So you're held to that so that the SACOG board is held whole in what you paid for. We owe you then, if we're going and potentially recommending funding onto projects that the board hasn't awarded, a conversation like this with an analysis of, does this advance the blueprint? Because if we're moving, say, a project that's going to hurt our ability to meet air quality conformity, and we're advancing it through one of these loans, that's not supporting blueprint implementation and probably not something that we could recommend to you. Or if we did, we need to disclose that here's the trade-off in that. And then it would be the board's kind of at your discretion to decide, does that merit going ahead with this action to implement the long-range plan?
Got it. Okay. All right. Like I said, it may be a little bit of a far-fetched possibility, but if there's a system, people will try and game it a little bit, even if it's within the rules. Okay, excellent. Any other questions? All right, any public comment?
There's no public comment.
Okay, so in the matter of the Hazel Avenue US 50 interchange for local dollars from 3 other projects in Sac County, would anybody like to make a motion to approve that? Okay.
Second, Baines.
All right, we have a motion by Maple and a second by Baines. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion carries. All right, this brings us to the information section of our agenda. First up will be item number 5, which is blueprint implementation activities for November and December 2025 and January 2026. And Lisa Lind from our SACOG staff is going to present the item. Welcome, Lisa.
Yeah. Good afternoon, committee members. I'm Lisa Lind, Principal Planner on SACOG's Planning and Programming team. So this is an informational item related to Blueprint. So as Clint covered at the start of the meeting, the Lunar Committee oversees development of the Blueprint, and with the recent adoption of the 2025 Blueprint, we're focused on implementation. And for us, a key part of implementation means supporting you, our member agencies and partners. So with that in mind, we wanted to recap the activities from the last few months of 2025 and preview some of the work that we are doing for a really strong start to 2026. And going forward, we're going to have regular information items on the letters, outreach, programming support, any technical assistance that SACOG provides on an ongoing basis, because we know that the work is more than adopting the plan or awarding the project for funding, and it requires real intentional follow through and support. So I think the timing of this just is great after Miguel's presentation, because you're seeing some examples of that. So one of the common things that you're going to read and review in the staff report that we submit is where SACOG provides what we call MTP SCS consistency letters. So certain types of housing and mixed use projects can get some environmental review relief if they meet certain conditions, such as being consistent with the 2025 Blueprint. So last year we would have been working with the previously adopted plan, and our staff received some requests for projects and prepared 3 consistency letters for lead agencies. And we did see that the request tapered off as the Blueprint was coming together. And so we're going to be tracking the requests that staff gets to see if there's any changes, but typically this has been something that we're providing pretty frequently, and we're really working close with the jurisdictions. So we've recently updated a consistency worksheet to really help prepare that evaluation. It provides a lot of clarity and certainty for the planning staff. And then one of the early steps that we're taking in 2026 is to update and organize online resources related to the Blueprint. We're hoping that this will bring more information at the hands of planners who need it on a daily basis. And so we're going to come back to you and report more on that rollout, but just wanted to let you know that we were thinking about it and your staff at agencies are probably going to be hearing from us soon with some questions about how can this be the most useful for you. Over the past few months, for sure throughout all of last year, you were hearing about the progress of Green Means Go. And this is incentivizing infill in our locally adopted green zones. You're going to see quite a bit of work listed for the Green Means Go program in these staff reports, summarizing what we consider to be a lot of successful coordination. So this includes working with the REAP 2.0 subrecipients last year to finalize extensions through 2026 and starting work with the Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods, or RCN recipients. That behind the scenes work enabled 76 projects to move forward with planning efforts and construction improvements for infill housing development within the region. So the news about increased housing, that's a majority of the attached housing and locally adopted green zones as well. It really shows that the Green Means Go programs is in part helping to substantially increase infill in the region. So we want to keep you up to date with some of those activities that are contributing to it. One of the highlights from last year was our partner, the California Special Districts Association. We did a collaborative planning series. So participants came together to learn more about some of those key programs like Green Means Go, but also just learn how they could be more informed and help shape infill across the region. This was a really successful series of events, really engaged participants. And so we're going to bring a more detailed summary of that back to this committee. And we're just looking at it for how it can also be replicated, just really using that success. We hosted several webinars last year, and we just wanted to say that we finished up the last part of 2025 with an especially great webinar on the new housing and land use laws. So that grew a great turnout. We had 65 participants from cities and counties, so we were just so appreciative that everybody tuned in. Our partners at BBK were really great about offering some practical advice about how are we navigating some of these challenges that we see coming up this year and in the next few years. And then speaking of all the new legislation, Senate Bill 79. So this was covered in detail at the webinar with a lot of the city and county staff. This is a new law, and when it goes into effect July 1st, it's going to increase allowed residential densities around certain qualified transit locations. There's been a lot of interest across the state on this. And so we're putting together a reference map and some guidance for affected local governments. We're going to plan a presentation that goes into a lot more detail on this bill, on the map and the resources that we're putting together, because we know there's a lot of interest in this. So more to come on that. And then we continue to work on technical assistance products for local governments that we hope is going to save time and bring some additional clarification to what we know everyone has started to think about, which is the upcoming 7th cycle housing element process. And then we're scheduling some site visits to meet with some of our housing partners and planners around the region. So that's going to be a really great opportunity for us to hear directly from a lot of folks who are facing this in the next few years. So we hope this reoccurring item is really a way to help you track what we're doing and all the service, technical assistance, and the resources that we're using to implement the blueprint. And so when you come across a question or a project or an opportunity that you think is going to benefit from SACOG support, we're really hoping that you reach out to us or have your staff reach out. After this month, we're going to be reporting on what we did, but think of this as more of an invitation and a proactive of, come to us and ask us how we can help. We're really proud of some of the services, some of the programs, the training and webinars. So where we can really build on that and make it the most useful to you, that's really what we want to be here for. So that's the end of what I wanted to report on today. Thanks for your time. We're also happy to answer any questions if you have them.
What would you say is the principal motivation of SB 79?
The principal motivation.
What's the thing it's trying? What's the thing it's? What's the thing it's trying to achieve most importantly, and how successful you think it will be? And that is purely an opinion question.
Yeah, I want to give my.
Because we have a little bit of heartburn about it out in Folsom, so.
I'd imagine you do.
Yeah, fair enough. I want to.
It's a one-size-fits-all attempt to densify things that maybe shouldn't always be densified.
Yeah, so it certainly can't answer a question of the intent of the legislature, but I think what we do have some indication from the legislative intent section of the bill, and the intent is to try to allow for increased densities around transit more generally. So it's
Okay.
kind of increasing allowed densities, FARs, and trying to facilitate more dense housing near those transit stops.
And what new mechanisms does it use to try and achieve that goal?
So the bill actually preempts local zoning to basically change the allowed
That's
densities.
it. You didn't have to say anything else. Thank you. Preempts local zoning. All right.
Yes.
But maybe the thing to know too is
Yeah.
that MPOs have a role to produce a map, right? And so that's the thing. We're spelled out in the law that is our responsibility. So we've also been working a lot. Maybe you want to explain a little bit about working with the staff.
Yeah, so yeah, since the bill passed, it seems fairly simple when you kind of see the top line of like, well, it's around transit, but there's a lot of kind of detail around what transit and where and how far from transit and how do you draw those buffers. And so we've been participating in a working group that is made up of the other kind of MPOs across the state that are, you know, affected by this bill, as well as the State Housing and Community Development Department, who is kind of responsible for kind of regulating the local approvals of this stuff. So we've been participating in that working group to try to come to a consensus on how to interpret that bill, and have participated in 3 meetings now. We anticipate a couple more. We're hoping to hear from the state with a guidance document, or potentially a what we heard from MPOs document is how I think they're phrasing it, to kind of, again, reach that consensus. Once we have a little bit more clarity on that, then we'll be coming back to you to kind of walk through our methodology on the map. But we've been working directly with your staff and all of the affected jurisdictions in the region to kind of make sure that we're seeing this the same way.
Terrific. Okay, thank you. I was just curious about that. Any other questions? All right, any public comment?
There's no public comment.
Okay, this one's information only, and we are very lucky we got Dove to the table because the next item is his. Information item number 6 is the Regional Vehicle Miles Traveled Mitigation Strategy Targeted Outreach Results. Mr. Kagan.
Okay, thank you. If we could pull up the PowerPoint. So yeah, good afternoon. My name is Dov Taden. I'm the program manager for Green Means Go. And so this item today is to present the outreach results from our exploration of a regional vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, mitigation strategy. This is a conversation that this committee began actually last August when we discussed the potential for using VMT mitigation to fund Green Means Go. And at that meeting, this committee really directed staff to conduct targeted outreach to kind of learn more. So since then, we've procured Darwin Musavi here as a consultant and facilitator to kind of conduct a series of focus groups and some interviews. And this is our first opportunity to really discuss that outreach with this committee. So we're excited to be in front of you today. We are, I think, lucky to be working with Darwin as a facilitator on this particular topic, because in his previous role as the Deputy Secretary for Environmental Policy and Housing at the California State Transportation Agency, or CalSTA, he actually helped really kind of initiate this conversation at the state level with the State VMT Mitigation Bank that we're going to be talking a little bit about today. So very much have an expert for all of your hard questions today. But before I do turn it over to Darwin, I want to take a few moments to just provide some context about what VMT mitigation is and how it relates to Green Means Go. And then Darwin will then walk us through what we heard in that outreach, really organized around some key themes that we heard, and then we'll open it up to this committee for discussion. So this is admittedly, I guess, a complicated topic, and one that we are going to be unpacking across several committee presentations over the next few months. So questions are welcome for sure. We will try to pause a couple times as we make our way through, although we do have quite a bit of content to cover. Our ask of you today is to just sort of hear and absorb some of the key themes from outreach, and really specifically provide a little bit more feedback on our proposed next steps, which we'll talk about. So starting first with Green Means Go, and you heard a little bit about this from Lisa, but as a reminder, right, Green Means Go is our region's collective attempt to try to create more housing in these infill areas with an emphasis on product type diversity and affordability. We do this through 3 basic strategies, right? We're trying to provide technical assistance to local governments around sort of the kind of local reforms that really can make it easier and faster to build housing. We're funding those policy reforms. And then we're funding targeted infrastructure investments that really reduce costs and risks for developers. And in particular, I think this program is really focused on those investments that are really the non-transportation infrastructure side. So, thinking like sewer and water upgrades, these are things that we know are extremely critical to building that housing, but are otherwise quite difficult to pay for. There really aren't a whole lot of existing funding sources out there for this type of thing. And so frequently what will happen is that onus is put onto the developer, and it can drive a lot of these projects to be infeasible. So this program, I think, is kind of filling a niche in the kind of funding market. We've had a lot of success, as referenced by Lisa, securing state and federal grants in this program. Over the first 5 years, we have $60 million funding projects across 4 different sources that we've now kind of allocated down to the local level in the form of about 75 grants. We've basically completed now those first 2 sources. We're making our way through our REAP2 and RCN grants right now. These grants are geographically focused on funding projects in green zones, which, as you know, these are locally nominated places that local government has said this is where we really want to focus our attention first. And when you couple Green Means Go investments with all of that fantastic work that's happening at the local level, what the region is doing is actually working here. We've seen a dramatic uptick in completed housing permits in green zones since the inception of this program. This is actually a fairly substantial chunk of our regional housing production at this point. And as we've talked a little bit about in August, this program has been entirely funded through one-time state and federal grants. And the funding environment at the state and federal level looks a lot different than it did a few years ago. We are continuing to pursue outside funding opportunities as they arise, and actually we'll have an opportunity for I think a good conversation on this next month at this committee. But part of what we're trying to do today is explore with this committee, what are the creative ways to fund this work that doesn't really rely quite as much on these one-time competitive grants at the state and federal level. And that's really what, or I guess how this idea of the regional VMT mitigation strategy came up. It is, an opportunity to implement our blueprints. We have a policy in the 25 blueprint, Policy Vibrant 2, that essentially says we're trying to identify a more stable source of funding for the program. So this committee did have a chance to talk a bit about this back in August, but what am I talking about when I say VMT mitigation? And this is the wonky part of the presentation here, so bear with me, but I guess per the chair's comments, I'm not going to apologize for going into the details here. So as you might already be aware, ever since 1970, when government really at any level in California approves a project in the physical world, it is subject to the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. And that means whoever is building that project, whoever is sort of moving dirt, has to evaluate the impact of that project across several topics. And transportation and kind of managing new traffic has always been one of those topics since the inception of this law. If that analysis shows that the project will have impacts, you have to do what's called mitigate those impacts. So, project sponsors have always had to evaluate transportation in CEQA, but in the last decade, the state passed a law that says when you are kind of evaluating the impact of a project on transportation, you really have to measure that impact based off of a metric called vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. And so the idea is, right, more driving and traffic means increased VMT, less driving and traffic means decreased VMT. Projects that are going to result in increased VMT, which are, you can generally think of those as, new road, new highway projects, maybe new land use projects, right, that are more on the periphery and kind of requiring folks to drive further distances. Those projects have to find a way to offset or to mitigate the extra driving that those projects are creating. That's the basic setup. And these mitigations are probably things that folks are familiar with here, because they're frequently things that SACOG funds, right? Complete streets projects, transit, right? Green Means Go projects that are kind of unlocking new housing in green zones where you might not have to drive quite as far. Figuring out how we balance these scales at a regional level, that's something that SACOG does quite a bit. It's probably a concept you are all fairly familiar with at this point. what we're talking about here is that actually project sponsors have to do this balancing act as well at the project level. So, we frequently do regional level analysis. We're talking now individually delivering on projects. So what is the current state of play for how people comply with this state law right now? So the standard practice for addressing this, at least since 2018, is for the project sponsor, be it, Caltrans for highways, local governments in the case of roads frequently, right? Or the developer in the case of greenfields, is to seek their own VMT mitigations, right? So project sponsors are essentially, cold calling other entities, affordable housing developers, transit agencies, right? Carpool services, whatever it might be. And everyone is just kind of one at a time trying to figure out how am I going to deliver my project? How am I going to mitigate the impact of my project? And as you can imagine, this has led to a little bit of, somewhat of a haphazard set of mitigations, as it's kind of a difficult position to kind of put these actors in to kind of harmonize these mitigations in a strategic way, right? It's not necessarily their job to do that. And in many ways, it has also kind of presented itself as a barrier to delivering projects by adding time and money and sort of cost to projects. I think one of the hardest parts of this process on project sponsors from what we've really kind of heard as part of our outreach is, yes, it's finding the mitigations, but it's also feeling comfortable that the calculation for how much VMT is going to be reduced, actually balancing the scale there, is actually going to hold up in a court of law, because CEQA is kind of a legal process. Some of these projects do end up getting sued. So that's been how folks have done it. I think it's fair to say there's been, I think, some frustration with that process. And then this last summer, the state established a new option for mitigating your projects. And so that's called the Statewide VMT Mitigation Bank. And we've talked a little bit about this before. But essentially, the state bank is going to be setting a price for VMT. It's going to allow for projects to then, that are seeking mitigation to pay into that state bank. And that bank will specifically fund affordable housing projects in low VMT parts of the state. So it's an optional kind of fee out program for projects to kind of confidently comply with CEQA. And it's going to be operational starting on July 1st of this year. And while it's great to provide more of a straightforward option for project sponsors that reduces that uncertainty, there is a little bit of a catch, right, with the state bank. You can pay into the state bank, and then that money can then fund projects outside of your region, right? It is a truly state bank. So you can, for example, mitigate say a new road project in Yuba County by paying into this state bank, and then that funding can then sort of fund an affordable housing project in San Francisco, right? The other downside of this funding is that it's going into a competitive affordable housing program that's run by this California State Housing and Community Development Department, HCD, and we do not really have right control over that program. Nonprofits might have to spend a lot of money on applications to sort of access that funding, even from within our region.
Has that completely replaced the previous unclear pathway, or just it's an additional pathway?
It's an additional pathway, and it's not even actually operational yet. So starting July 1st, okay. Project sponsors will have the option of going into either of these two banks, or either of these two processes. Although that is actually a bit unclear, because right now the state is now saying they might, for the first tranche of this bank, only be accepting money from public projects. We can go into a little bit more detail on that, but I think the intention is eventually any project seeking VMT mitigation can pursue either of these.
Is there VMT mitigation in the bank to be used?
Not yet, because the bank is not yet operational. So they will be able to accept.
But on July 1st, will
Correct.
there be? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Yep. Sorry.
Who sets the price? And I see you've got 3 different arrows all across California. Does that mean there's 3 different prices, or?
Yeah. So the bank will be run by 2 entities: LCI, which is a Land Use and Climate Innovation department at the state, and then HCD. HCD is more on the funding the affordable housing side. They're on the back end. The setting the price happens at LCI. And so they're going through a process now of trying to create that. To your question, yes, I believe the current intention is that they will be setting different prices across the state depending upon the region. So those are the first kind of two options that are at play here. Some challenges with both the current state of play, but also potentially with the state bank. What we're talking about, I think, today is the potential for creating a third option. And that's for project sponsors to kind of use a regional VMT mitigation strategy that will fund Green Means Go projects. So the idea behind this strategy would be threefold. The first would be to create a competitive alternative to the state bank that retains funding within the region and kind of allows for potentially a little bit more flexibility to be kind of responsive to our local priorities here. Number two, to provide a more stable source of funding for Green Means Go. That is sort of the impetus for us being involved in this conversation in the first place, is to kind of create that stable source. And then number three, to improve project delivery by reducing uncertainty for project sponsors who are trying to build their projects. This is not going to be the focus of the conversation today, but a regional strategy could take a couple different forms. There's a lot of configurations for this that are on the table. I'll just mention a couple of these just for context. So the first is we could create a regional bank that mimics the statewide bank setup, where projects that are seeking mitigation would have the option of paying into a regional account as well, that then pools funding and then funds Green Means Go projects across our region. We could also create what's called a regional exchange, VMT exchange, in which SACOG essentially acts as a matchmaker. And in that option, we'd be soliciting VMT reducing projects. We would provide a calculation of the VMT benefits of those projects, list those on a website, some sort of clearinghouse, and then facilitate this direct connection between project sponsors funding those projects directly. So we wouldn't actually hold the dollars. This bank versus exchange question is, again, not the focus of today's conversation, and one we can definitely get into in a later presentation and plan to in April. But currently, several other regional and sub-regional entities across the state are exploring both of these types of strategies in response to the state bank. In fact, some are already operational at this point. The main point here is that SACOG could, the board could elect to create either of these options under its existing authority without any sort of state enabling legislation or creating any new sort of JPA or governance structure. This is well within SACOG's power to create something like this. Okay, is that enough detail, Chair? That was a lot of context, I recognize, but hopefully I think helpful background, I think, for today's conversation. I'm happy to pause if there's any more kind of clarifying questions on this point before we turn it over to Darwin to talk a little bit more.
One simple one, I think. Is our overall objective with the blueprint to reduce vehicle miles traveled? So how do you, okay, so if you are making discrete exchanges of reductions and adds, how do you square that against the macro goal of reducing over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's overall policy.
And hopefully that's one that you can do without going too far afield.
Yeah, so you're right that this is intended to be a net neutral process, right? We're sort of having projects that are increasing VMT, ensuring that the increase is offset by making it more likely that these reductions are happening. I think this gets to the project level versus regional level conversation, which is, I think at a regional level, we're looking to reduce VMT and reduce greenhouse gas emissions through the plan, through policies and programs. And I don't know if Clint, you want to add more to this context, but that's the regional idea. And then this is at the project level for folks complying with CEQA. So it's a slightly different context, and we're not trying to reduce the VMT through these projects. We're trying to offset the impact of VMT. Make sense?
Yes, I'll ask you offline to go into more detail about that one. All right, any other questions?
Yes,
Director Maple.
Thank you, Chair. Less of a question, maybe more of just a comment. One, I'm really supportive of exploring this. I know I've said this before, but I just think that the idea of a statewide mitigation bank, the first thing that comes to mind is, where's the money going to go? Is it coming from us and it's going to go to Southern California or somewhere else? And so I think it makes sense to act more regionally and to be able to make sure that we can have that mitigation locally to the extent that we can. And then I know that you mentioned, I also sit on the board of STA. See our STA directors in the audience. So I know that there's kind of two parallel conversations that are happening right now. And so I know you addressed this, but just want to make sure. So we're coordinating and having conversations with STA and SACOG to make sure that, hopefully we're not duplicating efforts, or just would love to learn a little bit more about that.
Sure. So, this I think Darwin will be covering this a little bit in his outreach themes. That's a key theme, but I think maybe I'll just introduce that idea, right? So STA and SACOG are both exploring, as you're noting, a VMT mitigation strategy, but we're looking at, different scales with different starting places, right? So STA is obviously focused on Sacramento County, maybe more of a little bit of a transportation emphasis for the mitigations that they're looking to fund upfront. And then while we're looking at, something a little bit more regionally, 6 counties, right, with a starting place of funding more Green Means Go style investments. I know Executive Director Busey is in the audience today. I think we've had, several, good conversations so far about the opportunity to kind of align on some of these things, across methodology, verification, defensibility, things like that. I think we want to be able to continue that conversation moving forward about how we can kind of complement each other. And as you said, avoid some of that duplication. But
And I know you will. I appreciate the outreach and the communication that's happened. So what I think I heard was, on the one, SACOG, we're still determining what this could even look like. So this is the beginning steps. But what I'm hearing is that the possibility of it including housing as well as transportation, versus, housing is probably not as much in, STA's wheelhouse potentially for their bank that they would be proposing. Is that right?
I wouldn't want to speak for STA.
You can come up if you want,
For
but
the chair, Director Busey could come up.
if it's okay through the chair.
Yeah, I'm
Mr.
okay
Busey.
if he wants to comment. It seems like there's probably room in the world for multiple banks
Sure.
at different scales and for different purposes.
I just want to make sure I understand the
Yeah.
differences. Hi.
Yeah, so from SDA standpoint, I think we're looking at a VMT mitigation bank, at least at the staff level. When we've talked to all our stakeholders, that's what they're interested in. And we're looking to fund, mostly transportation, maybe 85% transportation, but I think there's probably like 15% of infill housing. Some of you might remember we had a bill, AB 1223, which gives us the ability to fund infrastructure that supports infill housing as future transportation sales tax measure. So, and part of that was, because of this blueprint policy, essentially saying, let's figure out a way to fund Green Means Go. Okay, can we fit some of that within what we do? And so we were trying to kind of include that with that bill. So I think we would have a component of housing in there.
Okay, that's really helpful.
Probably a lot smaller than, yeah.
Well, it seems righteously complementary, even if, they're looking at a segment of the market and SACOG's looking at a slightly different one or bigger one, and the state's looking at yet another, or maybe there's a mega region version of this. It could be right size for the right project, right?
Yeah. Oh, I just really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing kind of what this shakes out to look like once we have more conversations. And obviously, all of our various jurisdictions are different with different priorities, but for the communities that I represent, housing, affordable housing especially, is a really big priority, and especially on the infill side. Within the city limits, we have a lot of opportunities for infill, but not necessarily the resources to make sure that we have the infrastructure to make it happen. So obviously a big fan of Green Means Go. So this is all really interesting. I look forward to seeing what we come up with. Thank you.
Great. Other questions at this juncture? Director Bradford?
Yeah, through the chair, maybe more of a broad question about VMT mitigation in general. And is that complementary to, I guess, maybe development impact fees related to housing development? So I certainly understand from a road project or a transit project perspective, or any other local government project that needs to mitigate. But when you have a developer coming in, a lot of jurisdictions charge development impact fees to build transportation infrastructure, more of an LOS kind of mitigation, I guess I'd say, rather than a VMT mitigation. These two things, one doesn't replace the other, right? They both exist. Is that maybe a correct understanding, or?
I hate to throw Darwin a question before we even really introduce him here, but yeah, I'm actually curious if you want to speak to a little bit of the conversation on LOS versus VMT and how that evolved.
Sure, and I'm gonna take the chair's opening on getting into the weeds here. I think there's a couple things to consider here. So what we're talking about in terms of VMT mitigation is really under CEQA and CEQA requirements. Local governments have their own authority to set impact fees outside of that. So no longer do local governments measure LOS and charge for LOS under CEQA. But there can be impact fees outside of that that still use LOS that are not in relation to CEQA, if that makes sense. That's
Yeah,
the simplest.
CEQA is an impact fee of sorts.
What was that?
CEQA is an impact fee.
Yeah, that definitely answers the question. So it doesn't negate impact fees if a local government is charging those for specific transportation projects that they've identified are needed and they're having development pay in to fund those.
They're still allowed to use LOS, yeah, in that form.
Okay.
All right, please press ahead.
Oh, okay, great. Well, yeah, as I mentioned, Darwin is going to be walking us through what we heard in our outreach about this idea. But as he does, please do be thinking about the next steps that SAP has proposed. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the outreach themes more generally, but the next steps are really what we're hoping to really get your feedback on, and we'll be hopefully, I think Darwin will be kind of connecting the dots between some of the themes we heard and those next steps. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Dob. Thank you again, Lunar Committee, for having me. As mentioned, my name is Darwin Musavi. I've been brought on as an independent consultant and facilitator to help with the outreach effort of this effort. And, just wanted to start off by saying, I'll be going through and providing some key themes of what we heard in the outreach. But before we get into that, just to set the tone for what we heard, we had a lot of general positive feedback on the concept. And I think, as you'll see, a lot of the conversation we heard from outreach participants across the region was more about the how and the who than the what. I think there's general interest in pursuing a VMT mitigation strategy in the SACOG region, and a lot of questions for you all to think about here in terms of how we go about doing that. The other thing I'll say as I go through this, I will be talking about both areas of agreement and disagreement. I'll be starting with some areas of agreement and then going into areas of disagreement. And then I'll tie some of those next steps that Dov had on that previous slide to the various themes that we heard as I go about this. So in terms of the overall approach we took, so between November and January, based on the feedback of the Lunar Committee in August, we went out and did some public outreach. We had 5 focus groups made up of partner agencies, advocacy organizations, community-based organizations, local governments, and housing developers. There were over 50 different organizations that were invited to these focus groups. I think we had about a little over 35 participate and accept those invites and participate. The focus groups were divided by group type, so they weren't kind of commingling. We had a separate set of questions per group to really get into the expertise that each of those types of stakeholders bring. And then additionally, as already has been mentioned, there's been conversations that are happening and key interviews that we held with partner agencies, including the Sacramento Transportation Authority, to really talk about kind of partnership and collaboration with their effort that they're also undertaking. Some of the key questions that we asked in the focus groups, these are some of the bigger themes. We had a lot of sub questions, but we really wanted to ask, should the region pursue a VMT mitigation strategy? And then within the context of Green Means Go, if that were to be the focus, what mitigation activities should be prioritized for funding? How do we think about trade-offs between where these investments are, what type of investments we make, and the cost efficiency of mitigations? And then if SACOG were to pursue a mitigation strategy, what are the best ways for SACOG to collaborate with its partners to ensure success of the program? These are the themes that are also in the packet that was provided to you. I won't read them all here, but we'll go through them each one by one. So starting off with the topics of extensive agreement, the first theme we heard was that there was, as I mentioned, broad interest in pursuing a VMT mitigation strategy in the SACOG region. So somewhat agnostic of who does it, how it works. There was interest in this concept. People repeatedly talked about how project by project mitigation is inefficient and how a regional approach offers scale, consistency, and predictability to this issue. There were conversations mainly focused on the how and not the if in terms of pursuing these types of strategies. There was also some concern about the state bank and whether all those dollars, if that's the only option in the region, wouldn't necessarily return to the region. The next theme that we heard was around cost effectiveness and program competitiveness and how they are central to the success. So we heard this repeatedly from various outreach participants. Projects will choose the lowest cost VMT mitigation option. That became clear in talking to folks. Particularly developers talked about how that'll be a main driver as they seek to mitigate projects. And so having a bank or exchange or whatever program is pursued in the region be cost competitive was something that everyone was really interested and focused on. The dollar per VMT reduction can vary widely by project type and location. So that's why that was a kind of a key part of the conversation. And then it was also kind of discussed how administrative costs can affect competitiveness. This also came up in the context of the state bank, where we'll see what that looks like ultimately. But there's some speculation and assumptions that the state bank will have fairly high administrative costs compared to what the region might be able to provide. So that's something to think about as well. And in an optional program, again, the bottom line is if it's not cost competitive, people won't use it. So in terms of some next steps tied to this that staff are proposing, the first one is to estimate the cost efficiency of different types and locations of VMT reducing projects to understand how different configurations of a regional VMT strategy would impact competitiveness, to have a sense of that, and then to compare this analysis to what is being proposed at the state bank when that is available. The third kind of theme of agreement was around the role for SACOG on technical guidance. So regardless of how participants felt in terms of who should administer a program and what a program should look like, there was some consistency around the region in folks looking for SACOG to play a key role in providing technical guidance, data, and reporting to ensure kind of a consistent approach in the region on a mitigation strategy. A potential next step here that's being proposed is to look at the scope, the time and resources it would take for SACOG to develop and administer both its own program, but also to provide technical assistance to other programs that might be developed in the region, and to get a better sense of what could potentially be provided here. So moving from areas where we had agreement to areas where there was still majority of agreement, but with some caveats and considerations for us to think about. We heard from participants that Green Means Go as a mitigation strategy is widely supported, but there are some important caveats to think about here. So we heard that infill housing is seen as a strategy that reduces VMT and that existing funding sources are insufficient. There was a lot of support for Green Means Go as a program, and it was seen as a needed investment, and that it's key in helping fill funding gaps for housing projects and projects that are Green Means Go eligible that are looking for those funds. However, one of the key caveats to talk about here is that there was also interest in transportation as a mitigation option by some. This was particularly expressed by some key partner agencies such as transit and local transportation agencies, although the sentiment was raised also by at least one participant in each of the other focus groups as well. Somewhat conversely, developers and some partner agencies also noted that a regional mitigation strategy that would fund multiple types of mitigation, such as housing and transportation, could increase administrative complexity of the program and potentially increase kind of the VMT costs of credits in a program. So that's something that we were cautioned to consider. We also heard from two local government staff participants that there's some sensitivity around the concept of housing as a mitigation strategy, particularly in areas where housing development is politically sensitive to begin with as a strategy.
Is what? I didn't hear the last part you said.
Basically, we heard from two local government staff that housing as a mitigation strategy might be sensitive in areas where housing is politically sensitive to begin with.
Okay,
So-
gotcha.
So where it's difficult to build housing politically, it might be hard to sell housing as a
I
mitigation.
understand. Thank you.
So again, a next step here to really think about is that first one that I mentioned around doing an analysis of what's really cost efficient. I think that is a key driver to think about in analyzing what types of mitigation to consider in a bank. And so that's analysis that staff's proposing to do here and come back to think about kind of those different types of mitigations. The next topic of agreement with some kind of caveats and considerations on this one, it's more about considerations, was that we heard that equity considerations are integral to program credibility. We heard this particularly from some of our community-based organizations in the region. They mentioned that public input, transparency, and community benefits are essential to the program's success. They wanted to see investments that prioritize benefits to low resource communities, improve access to jobs and services, and avoid reinforcing sprawl or causing displacement in their communities. So these are considerations where staff does not have any immediate next steps identified right now, but believes that this feedback should be considered if and when a program is pursued in program design, so at a later stage. This takes us to the final two themes that we wanted to cover, and these are topics that require further discussion. So these are particularly areas where we had some potential disagreements or areas where there's room to really think through how these tensions are dealt with. So the first area of tension was between return to source preferences, cost effectiveness, and administrative simplicity. So there was strong interest by partner agencies and local governments in keeping dollars local. And then at the same time, an acknowledgement by many, including advocates and developers in particular, that regional pooling of funds for most regionally efficient mitigations improves cost effectiveness. So to kind of unpack this a little bit further, apologies if it's a little small on the screen there. There's some various pros and cons that folks brought up in the concept of a strict kind of return to source setting where the funds are returned locally versus a broader regionally administered program with regionally administered funding. So the pros in a return to source situation, you'd have kind of guaranteed that funding would always stay local. The cons would be that you'd have a fragmented structure with multiple price points. This could essentially, depending on how it's set up, almost act like 6 different banks under a larger umbrella. You'd have higher VMT mitigation costs due to higher admin costs and potentially less efficient mitigations, depending on if you have different efficiencies in different parts of the region. There's support from partner agencies and local government staff, as I mentioned, in the concept of return to source, but also acknowledgement of a lot of these kind of trade-offs and concerns here. On a regional administration and funding standpoint, pros are that you can prioritize the most cost-efficient VMT reductions regionally, and that could potentially set a lower price point for mitigation. You'd have lower administrative costs, you'd have simpler, more consistent programs, but the cons are that you'd have less local control or guarantees on exact locations of investments within the region. There is strong support for a more regional approach by advocates and then particularly developers who are really interested in kind of the cost efficiency component of the program. There was discussion amongst various folks in the different focus groups on various compromises that you can have and middle grounds you can find on this. Some of the ideas that were explored included things like looking at funding targets versus strict return to source settings, looking at kind of maybe a corridor-based approaches. There are various things that could be looked at here. Some of the next steps that we're recommending are taken here include developing potential options for balancing priorities around efficiency, geographic equity, types of mitigation, and administrative simplicity. So coming back with some potential scenarios of how you could balance these different objectives. And then also clarifying the costs and benefits of pursuing VMT mitigation banks or VMT mitigation exchanges within this framework to think about which one would be better suited tied to these considerations in particular. And then the final theme, which has already kind of been discussed, is around collaboration with the Sacramento Transportation Authority on their efforts. So while opportunities for collaboration exist, as a conclusion of this outreach, a partnership between SACOG and STA does require kind of further exploration to figure out what exactly that would look like. As mentioned, STA and SACOG have been in dialogue regarding potential partnership. We did have STA attend the focus groups. We had individual interviews with STA as well. There are numerous issues that have been brought up for further discussion, including kind of eligible use priorities that are being pursued in each effort, and the need to make sure that there isn't kind of pricing competition. So, some of the areas for collaboration we see are kind of alignment on shared technical foundations, and then looking for potential alignment around things like governance, pricing, and eligible uses to really ensure the goal being that these kind of work collaboratively versus kind of in conflict or in competition with each other. As mentioned, they would have different purposes or main purposes in terms of and different geographies. So still work to do there, but I think the next step is to kind of continue having those conversations to as both STA and SACOG get board direction evolves in understanding how best to have these two programs work together. So with that, this is the kind of summary of all those next steps. I know this is a lot of content we covered, but wanted to open it up to get feedback on are these the right next steps? Are we missing things? Are there other things we should be thinking about? And any questions you may have on outreach.
Boy, oh boy. Okay. I have about 1,000 questions, but I will defer to my board. Any questions from you directors?
No questions, but I just want to say this has been extremely informative and helped explain a lot and answer some questions that I had about this overall process. In particular, I think one of my biggest takeaways was that the project sponsor gets to choose how they want to mitigate. And so now I really understand the cost competitiveness and why that's important. Certainly, I know we all want to keep our money as close to our jurisdictions as possible, but I do think there are tremendous benefits to a regional bank that, like our other regional funding programs, they tend to over time support projects all across the region. And I'm sure that if we implemented a regional bank where it was somewhat competitive and funds were available to everyone, that, we would work to ensure that the same kind of thing happened over time. Projects were funded everywhere at a level, somewhere near what jurisdictions put in. So.
Any others? I have one, and I am looking for a succinct answer here, and maybe more discussion at the next time this comes up. But is one of the underlying presumptions here that this kind of trade through a bank operated by STA or SACOG or the state would make the mitigation better able to survive a court challenge?
So
is that
I could-
effectively what is that the primary underlying reason for this?
I think it's one of the reasons. I think, the funding Green Means Go, right, and keeping money within the region.
I get the merit of the trade, right? That actually, that makes beautiful sense. It looks a little bit like the trade we already make developers do for low-income housing, right? They give us dollars in the city of Folsom that we use later on to help fund low-income housing, right? Multifamily housing, which is also a VMT strategy at the same time, right? If I'm a developer and the ironclad way to avoid a court challenge on the VMT mitigation is to go through one of these banks, what's to stop the creep of the cost of the mitigation over time? Because at that point, you'll have the ironclad way and to sort of take away some, maybe judicial, variability and challenges. And whatever agency is acting as that bank would be able to write, within some limitation, their own check,
Yeah, I can, a couple points on that.
And that may
You know,
be the one to address at another time if you don't have a succinct answer, right?
Yeah, I think in terms of the legal defensibility piece, obviously that is something that's come up with folks that they're seeking in this process. They're also really interested in just a simpler pathway. Seeking individual mitigations can be very complicated for folks.
Simple is
so-
worth something.
Yeah,
So there's value in that.
So I think that's another driver. In terms of the kind of back end and price setting piece, I feel like the biggest defense against or a backstop against that is the competition that is forming, frankly. You're getting banks popping up in various parts of the state, so the price competition there will probably drive that. At the same time, the defensibility around price setting and whatnot of the mitigation and all of that, this is all through CEQA, so you're not necessarily ironclad just because you have a bank. Like, that bank and its methodologies and whatnot have to stand up to CEQA.
Ironclad may be the wrong turn of phrase, but a better chance of surviving, right? A
Potentially,
challenge.
yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's certainly, one of the intended advantages, right, of a regional approach is that you could hypothetically be reducing some of that legal uncertainty because you're not doing things on a one-off negotiation. You're having a transparent methodology and process by which you're coming to the conclusions that you are.
Okay, so then last thing, and this one legitimately, let's save it for another time, but it's how do you put a value on convenience? And how do you put a value on the defensibility in court of using one of these transactions versus going it alone and trying to come up with your own VMT strategy? And what's that worth? Because where you set the price initially, it, probably needs to incorporate those things, right? So
Yeah, it's a
anyhow,
really good
that's-
question and one that we did try to tease out a little bit with the development community, but it's very, very early and I don't think anyone really has an answer yet to the question. But
They're
I think
not
it's
going
a
to
really
volunteer that
important question.
information. They're not going to volunteer that information. That's too close to their checkbook.
Yeah.
So, very good. All right. Any final questions from directors? All right. Fantastic. Thank you very much for this and for unpacking that all the way. Any public comment?
There is no public comment.
All right. Fantastic. All right. This is the time for any other matters directors would like to raise. Anything? Okay.
That's good.
I will bring just one thing up that I should have said at the start of the meeting. I have one ear that is decorative only and does not work. If one of you asks for my attention and I kind of like roam around the room, please also raise your hand because that meant I couldn't tell who was saying it. So I know most of your voices pretty well, but just on the odd chance I don't get it, give me a hand also. Okay.
Can I give you one other matter?
Yes, sir.
I started with federal, sort of a federal update on federal legislation. Our policy committee on Monday morning will be getting a deep dive into state policy. And as just a reminder, the action that you took 14 months ago was to give us direction to go pursue an update, a modernization of SB 375. I think you've heard a little bit about this at the full board, but we've been working very hard on that. Our government public affairs team has been working very hard on that. And again, deep dive of the policy committee on Friday, working very closely with the MPOs, but also the other interest groups around the state, including environmental groups, transportation, construction, and many others. So stay tuned. But in terms of reaching those targets, those greenhouse gas targets, or if we don't reach them, what's the punishment? We are trying to make that a little bit more balanced at the end of the day.
Excellent. Okay, last call. All right, for those of you who can't wait, our next lunar meeting will be on Thursday, March 5th, 2026 at 1 p.m. in this same room at the same place. And for today, we are adjourned.